The phone rang at 6:14 on a Thursday morning. The man who answered was still in the hospital parking garage in Marion, Indiana, keys in his hand. He had been discharged an hour earlier, a routine procedure, 2 nights, nothing that required anyone to be called. He answered on the second ring. It was his neighbor, Glenn Prater, calling from a truck he could hear idling. Glenn said, "There's a crew on your property. I counted 4 of them. They've posted notices on both barn doors, and they've got a chain on your south gate. They had bolt cutters." The man said, "What notices?" Glenn said, "They say property subject to lien seizure. There's a court order number on each one. One of them told me to stay off the road." He paused. "They don't look like they're leaving." He thanked Glenn and hung up. He was 68 years old. His name was Calvin Marsh. He had owned 194 acres in Grant County, Indiana for 43 years. He had been at the hospital for 2 nights. The lien the company was claiming against his property had been satisfied in full on August 17, 1983. His father had the receipt. He got in his truck and drove the 31 miles back to the farm. Calvin Marsh had gone into the Army at 19 in January of 1975 and come back 3 years later wanting something that did not move. He'd watched men spend their service pay the week it arrived. He spent none of his. He worked 2 years in a machine shop in Marion after his discharge, adding to what he had saved in the service, and in the spring of 1981 he bought 194 acres in Grant County from a farmer named Earl Cooper, who was moving to Florida to be near his grandchildren. He paid $76,000. He had $210 left in his checking account the day he signed. He drove home, parked in front of the farmhouse, and sat in the truck for a while without going in. He had wanted land specifically, not a house, not a business, not a share of something. Land, in his own name, paid for, that he worked himself. His father, Harlan, had rented a house on the east side of Marion for 31 years and had died in it. The week after Harlan's funeral, Calvin was 14 years old. He'd stood in the empty rented house and understood that whatever his life looked like, it was not going to look like that. He had not forgotten standing there. He grew corn and soybeans on the eastern sections and ran a beef cattle operation on the west. He repaired his own equipment when it could be repaired. He paid his property taxes in January every year before anything else. He did not miss once in 43 years. Harlan Marsh had retired from a tool and die shop in Marion in 1989 and moved into the farmhouse for the last 14 years of his life. He was a careful man with paper, saved everything, dated everything, wrote notes in the margins of things he intended to keep. In the attic, he maintained a steel lockbox, dark green, with a hinged latch and a key he wore on his keychain alongside his house key and his truck key. In 2001, he had told Calvin, "Everything we need to keep this place is in that box. You'll know it when you need it." That was the only time he said it. Harlan died in 2003 at 76 years old, in the bedroom at the east end of the farmhouse. Calvin had kept Harlan's keychain on the hook by the back door ever since, next to his own keys, where it had been the morning Harlan died. He had opened the lockbox once since then, in the summer of 2004, for a deed. He had found what he needed, relocked it, and put it back. The letter had arrived March 21, 2024, propped against the front door. The company name was Consolidated Recovery Partners, LLC. The letterhead was clean and professional. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It said the company had acquired interest in a 1981 agricultural lending note originally held by Farmers Credit Corporation of Indiana, now dissolved. It said the note carried an unresolved lien against the property. It said they would be in contact within 10 business days regarding resolution options. Calvin had called the number and gotten voicemail. He had left a message. No one called back. On March 29th, a man named Derek Solt arrived at the farm. He drove a black SUV. He wore a suit. He was 36 years old and carried a folder and introduced himself as Consolidated Recovery Partners Regional Field Director. He stood on Calvin's porch and said the company had documentation of an outstanding lien of $94,000, inclusive of accumulated interest from 1981, and was willing to discuss settlement terms. Calvin said the loan had been paid off in 1983. He said this with the certainty of a man who had heard his father say it enough times to know the year and the amount. Salt nodded. He said the company's records did not reflect a satisfaction. He said if Calvin had documentation, he was welcome to present it. Calvin said he would look into it. On April 1st, 3 days later, Consolidated Recovery Partners filed for an expedited court order. The filing stated the property appeared to be unoccupied. It cited 2 site visits where no one had been present and attempts at contact had gone unanswered. Both visits had occurred while Calvin was at the hospital in Marion. The filing cited the unresolved 1981 lien as grounds for immediate recovery action. The court granted the order on April 3rd. The crew arrived April 4th at approximately 5:30 in the morning. Calvin was being discharged when they changed the lock on the south gate. He arrived home at 7:22. He drove to the gate and read the notices. He read the court order number. Glenn Prater had pulled to the end of the lane and was watching from his truck. One of the crew made a call. 20 minutes later, Derek Salt's black SUV came up the road and turned into the drive. Salt stood in front of Calvin with the folder open and said the order was valid. The process had been followed correctly, and Calvin was welcome to dispute it through proper legal channels. He said it with 4 crew members standing 10 feet away and Glenn Prater watching from the lane. When Calvin said the lien had been paid off in 1983 and he had the paperwork to prove it, Salt glanced at the crew member closest to him and said, "We'll look forward to seeing it." The way he said it made clear he did not expect to see anything. Calvin turned around and went inside. Consolidated Recovery Partners had spent 12 days on the Marsh file from first letter to seizure. 12 days to post notices on a barn a man had worked for 43 years. Calvin went to the hook by the back door and took down Harlan's keychain. The attic stairs were narrow and steep. The lockbox was under the eave where Harlan had always kept it, on a wooden crate, the green paint darkened with age. Calvin set it on the attic floor. He fit the key. The latch opened with the same resistance it had always had. Inside, in Harlan's order, the original 1981 loan documents from Farmers Credit Corporation, the agreement, the promissory note, the lien filing confirmation from the Grant County Recorder. Behind those, in a separate envelope labeled Payoff, August 1983 in Harlan's handwriting, the mortgage satisfaction document, dated August 17, 1983, signed by the original lender, a letter on Farmers Credit Corporation letterhead confirming receipt of final payment and stating the lien release had been filed with the Grant County Recorder. Behind the letter, a receipt from the Grant County Recorder's office, dated August 22, 1983, confirming the lien release had been recorded and indexed. 5 documents, 41 years old. Harlan had organized them in the order you would need them, oldest to newest, each one explaining the next. The payoff envelope was labeled in the same hand that had labeled everything else in the box, the same blue ballpoint pen pressed hard into the paper. The envelope had not been opened since 1983. Calvin sat on the attic floor and held the 5 documents. Through the small eave window, he could see the south gate and the chain on it. He called his attorney from the attic. Patricia Howe had practiced property and agricultural law in Marion for 19 years. He told her what had happened, what he had in his hands. She said expedited orders are hard to vacate quickly. She said the company had moved fast on purpose, and it would depend entirely on what those documents established. She said, "Bring everything." He said he'd be there in 40 minutes. She called before he reached the end of the driveway. She had already pulled the Grant County Recorder's digital index. The lien release from August 1983 was in the system, filed and indexed under the correct parcel number, recorded 5 days after Harlan made the final payment, exactly as the Farmers Credit Corporation letter said it would be. 41 years in the public record. She had also pulled Consolidated Recovery Partners' court filing, the document they had submitted to obtain the expedited order. Their title search, attached as Exhibit A, listed the 1981 lien as status unresolved. It cited the lien filing from August 1981. It did not cite the lien release from August 1983. The release was in the same public record, the same recorder's index, 2 entries below the lien. Their search had found the lien and stopped. She said, "Their own title search is what they filed with the court. Their own filing left out the release that's been sitting 2 lines below it for 41 years. Calvin said, "My father kept the receipt." She said, "Your father kept everything." Consolidated Recovery Partners had scheduled a liquidation auction for April 13th. Farm equipment, cattle, listed by lot. The location was the farm itself, Calvin's farm. The auction was publicly posted. Patricia Howe filed an emergency motion to vacate the court order on April 8th. 11 pages. Exhibits A through E were the 5 documents from Harlan's Lockbox. Exhibit F was the Grant County Recorder's digital lien release record. The cover argument was 4 sentences. The lien had been satisfied August 17, 1983. The release had been recorded August 22, 1983. The release appeared in the public record 2 entries below the lien filing Consolidated's Exhibit A had cited. The court order had been obtained on the basis of an incomplete title search submitted by the party seeking the order. The court scheduled a hearing for April 12th, the day before the auction. Consolidated sent 2 attorneys and a surveyor whose purpose became unclear once the hearing started. They had prepared arguments about title search methodology. They had matching folders. Calvin wore a clean shirt and his good boots. He drove himself in the same truck he had driven for 14 years. He sat at the table without an expression. Patricia placed the Grant County Recorder's digital index printout on the table and set Consolidated's Exhibit A beside it. She said, "The lien release has been indexed in the public record since August 22, 1983. It appears under the same parcel number as the lien filing, 2 entries below it. The company's Exhibit A cited the lien filing on the 3rd line of page 3. The lien release appears on the 4th line of the same page. The court order was obtained on the basis of an exhibit that cited 1 line and omitted the next." Judge David Foss, Marion Circuit Court, 22 years on the bench, read both documents without speaking. The room did not move. Consolidated's lead attorney looked at his folder. The surveyor looked at the table. Derek Salt in the back row looked at the wall. Judge Foss looked up. He asked Consolidated's attorney one question. Had the title search team reviewed the 4th line of page 3 of the Grant County Recorder's lien index for this parcel? The attorney said he would need to verify that with the search provider. The judge gave him 2 minutes. The attorney conferred quietly. He came back and said he could not confirm it at this time. Judge Foss vacated the court order from the bench. He found the order had been obtained through a materially incomplete presentation of the public record. He directed Consolidated Recovery Partners to remove all posted notices, locks, and equipment placed on the property within 24 hours. He referred the abandoned property claim to the county prosecutor's office for review. Consolidated's attorney said they would comply. Calvin and Patricia walked out into the morning. Patricia filed suit the following week for wrongful seizure, abuse of process, and damages. Consolidated Recovery Partners settled on September 18, 2024. The settlement was $374,000, covering the costs of the 9-day property disruption, lost cattle auction income, legal fees, and compensatory damages. The written terms included a formal acknowledgement, Consolidated's signature, that the 1981 lien had been satisfied in full on August 17, 1983, and that the 2024 court filing had omitted a recorded public document that had been in the Grant County Index for 41 years. Calvin signed at Patricia's office on a Wednesday afternoon. She slid the settlement across the desk. He used the pen she handed him and slid it back. She said, "Your father organized that box like he knew someone was going to need it." Calvin said, "He told me I'd know it when I needed it." She said he had been right about that. He drove home. The chain was off the south gate. The notices were gone from the barn. The property looked the way it had always looked. He went inside. He took Harlan's keychain off the hook by the back door. He climbed the attic stairs. The lockbox was on the wooden crate where he had left it. He arranged the 5 documents in Harlan's order: loan agreement, promissory note, lien filing, satisfaction document, recorder's receipt, and placed them back in the payoff envelope. He folded the envelope flap. He returned the envelope to the lockbox. He closed the lid and pressed the latch until it caught. He locked it. He carried it back to the corner under the eave and set it on the crate in the same position, the same orientation. He went back down the stairs and hung Harlan's keychain on the hook by the door. He went outside. He walked south to the gate. He stood at the fence line where the chain had been, a thin mark in the gravel where it had rested, and looked out across the field his father had helped him seed in 1982, the first full corn year, when neither of them had known yet whether any of this was going to work. The field looked the same as it always had. He said quietly, "It was all there, Dad." He stood there for a while. Then he turned and walked back to check the cattle. Harlan Marsh told his son one thing about the lockbox in 14 years of living on that farm. He said, "You'll know it when you need it." He did not inventory the contents or explain the order or say what each document meant. He trusted that the order would explain itself when the moment came. It explained itself in an attic on a Thursday morning with 4 crew members and a chain on the south gate and 43 years of work standing in the balance. Consolidated Recovery Partners had a court order, a crew, bolt cutters, and 12 days of preparation. Harlan Marsh had a steel box, a key on a keychain, and a payoff envelope labeled in ballpoint pen in 1983. The box held. Stories like this don't get told enough. The people who date the receipts, label the envelopes, organize the documents in the order someone else will need them, they rarely make the news. Subscribe, and we'll make sure they do. Next time, a 71-year-old widow in rural Georgia, a pipeline company claiming a 30-year easement across the south edge of her property, and a boundary survey her husband commissioned 3 weeks before he died. We'll see you there.